Okay, so welcome if you joined during that meditation. So, yes, let's get on with the topic of the evening. So we're exploring stories from this book, which we do happen to have for sale if you're interested in the bookshop here. Tales of Freedom, which was written by an order member called Kusalasara, and it's got stories from the Buddha's time. It's got quite a lot of Zen. The Zen tradition has a really good wealth of really quite hardcore stories, and also quite a lot of stories from the Tibetan tradition, which is where we're going to be spending some time today. And this story features a student and a disciple and teacher. And it's from a very famous lineage, actually. So there's this lineage of 4 teachers. Probably, if you know Tibetan Buddhism more than I do, you probably can say a lot more. There's a longer lineage, but a famous lineage starting with Tilopa, who was not from Tibet, actually. Tilopa, let me try and remember them. Tilopa, Naropa, Marpa, Milarepa. So Milarepa is the most famous of those characters, and there's this transmission going from those 4 teachers, and these people actually lived about 1,000 years ago, roughly, a bit more maybe, and it was a time when there was a big flourishing in northern India. It wasn't probably the country borders weren't the same as they are now, and Buddhism had spread to what is now Pakistan, and there was a huge thriving culture and a big university also in northern India called Nalanda, and Tibet was also developing its culture, its Buddhist culture, but Tibet was still sort of getting teachings from India, and many Tibetans who wanted to know more would come to India and go to this university called Nalanda, which was a real sort of cultural melting pot, and really, really very potent in developing Buddhist ideas and Buddhist culture. So that's just a sort of background. And actually, Nalanda doesn't really feature in our story, but so the story is between the middle 2 of this lineage, Marpa and Naropa, and we'll hear more about Naropa on another week. So this story happens. Marpa lives in Tibet. He is very, very keen. From a child, he's very interested in the Dharma, very precocious, also quite a wild child. That's what we're told in his biography. And wants to know more and more about the Dharma. So a few times in his life he's crossed the Himalayas and gone to India, gone to Nalanda, and gone to different places when he's heard about different teachers, to get teachings, to get not just sort of to go and buy Dharma books, but to actually like be with teachers and study under them. And I mean, it's sort of hard to imagine how perilous a journey from Tibet to those places on foot would have been, and how determined. I was chatting to someone in reception the other day, and she volunteers on reception, and she said she's from Barnet, and I was impressed, that she'd come to the Buddhist Centre quite often from Barnet. Probably has to change trains and stuff. So. We're talking about like such a different mode. And also, I was also speculating, like, I wonder if that sort of thing would also galvanise one's faith. Sometimes we take things for granted a little bit, like the fact that I can Google stuff means that I'm possibly a little bit lazy about my Dharma knowledge and pursuit of the Dharma. But anyway, that's a side thought. So Marpa, his disciple Milarepa, who is also very, very I don't know how you describe Milarepa quickly, let's call him a demanding disciple, receptive and demanding. He wants a particular teaching that Marpa doesn't have. So Marpa once again decides to go to India. And each time he goes to India, I think either the first or the second time, he took all his family wealth to offer to a teacher. So he came from quite a well-to-do family and took all his inheritance and gave it to his teacher. And this time, so we see him looking for, he's never met Naropa, but he's heard about him, and he knows Naropa's got this teaching, this very special, particular teaching that he wants to pass on to Milarepa. He's looking for him, but Naropa's gone off onto solitary retreat in the jungle, so he keeps Marpa keeps bumping into his disciples, and they're like, oh yeah, he went further west, deeper into the jungle, further west, deeper into the jungle, and so days and weeks, Marpa's looking for Naropa. I mean, I sort of can't even imagine that, like looking for someone randomly in the jungle, and the paths are getting narrower and less well trodden. And the thing is, Marpa is carrying this really, really heavy leather bag on his back. He's been carrying it for 2 years, so it's a familiar burden. And in it is another collection of gold, and in this time it's a big bag of gold dust which he's gleaned from. I mean, I don't know where he gleaned all this gold dust, but he's collecting from different people. Tibetan people are very, very faithful, so a sense of him collecting these offerings for these really, really precious teachings, and he's carrying it in a bag, and he's encountered brigands, he's encountered thieves, he's encountered rock falls, and also tax collectors and all sorts of people that putting him in jeopardy. And at one point he also went to prison. So it's miraculous that he's still got a fair bit of gold with him. He keeps going. He has a dream, so a portent tells him that he's on the right track. He keeps going, and eventually, I think he has a fever at some point, but anyway, eventually he sees his teacher sitting in meditation. So he sees Naropa in the jungle, and his teacher is a wild-looking man, as you would be in that situation. He's been having some very deep insights, which we will learn about in another chapter, and Marpa is so delighted to see him, and he runs up, and he sort of he's speechless. So just to say, Marpa is a man of some spiritual development. He's not like just a newbie. He's a man he's studied a lot, but he still knows he's got more to learn, and he's speechless. He prostrates at Naropa's feet and hands him the bag of gold. So Naropa can see that this man is receptive. He can see that he's practiced a lot of meditation, and he can see that this man is ready for a really, really special teaching. So what he does is he grabs the bag and he turns it upside down, and he just shakes out all of the gold dust. So the currents of air in the jungle, warm air, just kind of let the gold dust just kind of swirls around. The light streaming through the trees, it's glistening, it's like a glitter, what do you call it anyway, amazing, dazzling, over, and it's like a fireworks show or something, and then it's just swirling around Marpa's head. And Marpa has a very, very deep realization that the teaching has worked. His mind is suddenly absolutely free. Everything that he was holding on to has now just been thrown into the air. So that's the story. That's pretty much where it ends. That's where we leave them. And there's quite a lot in that story. The more I've been thinking about it over the past few days, the more I keep thinking, oh yeah, well, you could read this into it, you could read that into it. And we'll explore some of the different meanings to be found in it. But and I've got my own thoughts, but I thought maybe it'd be nice to hear from some of you what you think that story might be about. So if anyone's got any thoughts here in the room or online, what you get from that story before I add too much. Anything? Yes, Stefan.
I was thinking, because he was carrying the bag, and he's been carrying that for many years, it sounds like habits and things that we just do in our life and that we don't necessarily notice, and then they can just evaporate in one moment, and there's a beauty to that. There's no purpose of, like, it's not going to change your life on its own, but realizing that you can let go of that is quite powerful.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, so letting go of habits and that being beautiful and pretty powerful. Yeah, great, thank you. Any more? Just going to gather thoughts. Yeah?
Is it more like determination of the challenges on the way didn't stop him? He kept going, right? So he was determined to reach this, not giving up and maybe that's all.
Yeah. Well, it's a marvellous example of determination, isn't it? Yeah. And I mean, it's probably been turned into a fable, but it's based in fact as well. Like these people did make these journeys. Yeah, so inspiration from that determination as well. Yeah, good. And did you have a thought?
I was just going to say that I thought quite a similar thing about the habits, but maybe more so to do with possessions and desires that we have, that we just hold on to, and we can just like let them go and be a lot freer.
Yeah. So particularly gold can symbolise a sort of hoarding wealth, can't it? Yeah, really good. Are there any thoughts on online, Britta? Sorry. No, okay. Any more thoughts in here? Yeah, Kirsten.
It's almost like the value of the gold is like transformed as part of the story.
Yeah.
Martha carries it thinking like, oh, this is a really valuable thing that I can give. Like there's something kind of utilitarian. Well, it's not utilitarian because it's not really exchanged in the same way that we think of it, but like something precious to offer. And actually it's also kind of transports the teaching, so it's like precious in a different way.
Yeah, really, yeah, that's really true, isn't it? It's sort of like there's a sort of
Could you repeat what people are saying?
Yes, okay, so
I'm not sure if people can pick it up.
Okay, so the ideas we've had are that we can let go of habits, that there's a lot of determination in the journey, and also that gold, we can let go of our material possessions and there might be freedom there. And then Kirsten saying that the value of gold is also transformed in this story. So we think of gold as being a commodity almost, and we can either this is sort of expanding on Kirsten's point, we can either use it as something for exchange or it can be a gift, but it's even more transformed in this story in that it's turned into a teaching. The gold being thrown about in the jungle has turned into a teaching. Yeah, thank you, Kirsten. Yeah, so if you've got any more, I mean, it's not that I'm looking for right answers really, it's just that the story, even a really short story like this, just throws images up, doesn't it? And it's really nice to explore them. Yeah, so someone...
Yeah, so Julianne was saying whether it's about letting go of attachment and impermanence. What we've had
Yeah, letting go of attachment and impermanence. Well, I think that's true, isn't it? That Marpa must, in order for his mind to have responded so positively, he must have just let go in that moment. Because if he hadn't have let go, he would be doing what I would be doing, which would be going, oh no, I can't believe you did that. Like, it took me ages. All those people, all the things we could have done with it, we could have fed so many people, we could have done loads of good things with it. But he just understood something very, very deep. Yeah. Any more thoughts? Yeah.
I guess gold has been used quite carefully here, in that however beautiful or desirable something is, it can still be a burden. So this gold was heavy to carry and made his journey harder, even though it had this value and this aim at the end, but it was still a burden, and there was a relief in getting rid of that burden. So in the same way, already people have mentioned habits or possessions that we really desire and want and think fulfill our life, but actually letting go of everything ultimately gets rid of a burden in some way.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, really good points. Yeah, so both, gold being a burden, and the relief of getting rid of a burden. And in fact, one of the ways that the Buddha used to describe enlightenment, the Buddha was very famously reticent about talking about enlightenment. But one of the ways he described it, he'd say things like it was like a cool cave, or being free of debt. And I think one of the ways was also like of getting rid of a really, really heavy burden. So it was very tangible metaphors for enlightenment. Okay, so I'm going to say a few thoughts. That's really good. It's a really good selection of images and responses. So what I'm going to start with talking about is communication. So Marpa, he wanted a particular teaching, which is a communication, and what we're sort of looking at what levels are those communications. And he thought I'm very devoted. Here I am. I've been carrying all this stuff, all this heavy gold dust. Here's my devotion. I will express it to you, and you will tell me this esoteric teaching, this tantric transmission, which probably involves, some long mantras, a selection of different texts, and might take a little while before I learn it properly, but it's going to be very beautiful. So I think it's beyond exchange. Well, no, it is an exchange, and I think he knew that what he was giving was of less value than the transmission. I think he would have known that, because he's a wise man already, Marpa. But what we get is a non-verbal communication. It's kind of like there's this plot twist in his journey, and we get this non-verbal communication. And Vasantra talks about different modes of communication in this book, but he's saying how important it is that Buddhism isn't reduced to concepts. And concepts are marvellous. We don't want to be scathing of concepts or words, in fact. Like, they allow a huge amount. But Buddhism, the Dharma, can't only be transmitted through words. And deeper communications are through actions. And this is what happens, is that he's expecting, this recitation, probably, and he gets this totally spontaneous, completely unpremeditated action that completely avoids misunderstanding. There's no pitfall. We get into all sorts of pickles with words, don't we? There's no misunderstanding, because it's a transmission from a realised teacher to another very receptive student, disciple. And actually, Vasantra goes on to talk about different levels of communication, and he talks about 3. So apparently, there's the communication of Buddhas. Actually, what we're talking about here is not just communication, but how the Dharma is communicated. I should have made that clear. How the Dharma is communicated. And often when we're communicating the Dharma, it's someone who knows more, understands more about the Dharma, is trying to transmit something to someone who wants to know or understand more about the Dharma. So at the highest level, there's apparently the mind transmission of the jhanas. So this means that someone who's very, very receptive and very far along their spiritual path is communicating with a Buddha, an actual Buddha. And this communication is on the level of telepathy. So it's very, very subtle, very refined. It doesn't need words, it doesn't need anything as gross as action even. The Buddha can, if a student is receptive enough, can transmit telepathically a teaching that avoids all conceptual deviation. So that's one level of communication. And what we're talking about here is the sort of middle level, which is a pretty high level. It's called the Vidya Dara. Dara sort of means bearer, so wisdom bearing level of communication, where a realized teacher communicates something of wisdom sometimes it can be an action or maybe a mantra, or in the Zen tradition sometimes it might even be a Zen master whacking a student with a stick or shouting, or this whole chapter is talking about the lion's roar of the Dharma, so unexpected ways of communicating. And then there's the word transmission of the acharyas, which is ordinary practitioners using words and concepts to talk about the Dharma, which is what's happening here, lest we be in any doubt. So that's 3 levels of how we can communicate. But we can, Dharma Night is discursive, but we can take those words and deepen them. We can sometimes in communication, just those words, concepts affect us more deeply, and it becomes more like transmission. It becomes more like something that can actually sort of rock us more fundamentally than nice ideas to mull over. So that's one aspect of the story, is communication. How do we communicate? And the bit now I want to talk about now is what happened to Marpa, how his mind was suddenly free. And I really like this story because I feel like the gold dust floating through the air is such a beautiful image for the free mind, isn't it? No container anymore. Like the bag, perhaps the bag can be a symbol for Marpa's mind. It was a good, solid gold mind, but now it's completely free. So let's think about that in terms of how are we going to think about it? Yeah, just in terms of his journey, and like some of you were mentioning, holding on. He was still in this mode of like, I'm taking this bag of gold so that I can get a teaching for Milarepa. It was in the framework of selfhood. It was in the framework of I'm getting a teaching from this teacher. It was still in the framework of him and me. And what the big plot twist, I suppose, is that the whole framework, which is the basic fundamental framework from which we all operate, that was upended. So it's like it's like the very concept of him being identified or mesmerised by selfhood in the way that we all are, that was completely dissolved by this action. So maybe I'll just say a little bit more about that idea. It's really nice to look at it in terms of what that freedom is. And Vasantra talks about this. One of the things, we're talking about concepts, and one of the things that happens in meditation, sometimes if we're, even in a little meditation like that, we start to be less preoccupied by the superficial thoughts that are going like, I didn't do that, I've got to do this, or this is like this, or it's not good enough, or it's I'm not good enough, or what's for dinner, I'm really hungry, or when's the tea break, like all of this might still be there, but it changes tone, and we can sometimes, or quite often, get into a deeper, richer experience of ourselves. The more we meditate, the more available those kind of richer experiences are, and sometimes we can touch into a non-discursive mode, where our conceptual framing of experience is just quieter. It's just quieter, and this is really, really freeing. And maybe actually you might experience it not in meditation. I was thinking, I haven't had it for ages, but I used to sometimes get this thing, wake up in the middle of the night, and I'd forgotten who I was. It's like my non-conceptual, my conceptual part of my brain was not yet awake, and it's really blissful. I don't know if anyone's ever had this. It's like I feel so open. I don't know anything. It's like all the burden of my personality is not there. And all there is like bliss, really. And sometimes that experience can happen in meditation. It sometimes happens listening to music or in nature. We're just freed of this kind of tyrannical verbalization that goes on. But what that is an over-identification with being this person in particular, here and now. And Vasantra talks about being sort of hypnotized by selfhood. It's like, actually, we're not selves, but we're sort of hypnotized by this idea of ourself. And he talks about meditation being one way that can begin to attenuate. And this idea of this idea that we all hold, that we're born with actually, is the root of all our troubles. It's the root of all our aversiveness. It's the root of all our craving, because this idea of a self needs things, and it needs things to be one way, and it needs things to not be another way. So it creates all this tension. Yeah. So there's a metaphor of the mind in meditation. There's gold dust as well, and a mind completely freed from the boundary. This, I think, is described as a leather bag, which is we can take that as our own fixed view of ourselves. Vasantra also talks about generosity, which I think is interesting in terms of gold, because it can be, these things of value can be ways, commodities can be ways in which we can be generous. So they're not in and of themselves good or bad, they're modes of expression, I suppose. But what he's saying in this is that generosity is a really direct way for us to also go beyond this limited idea of ourselves. It's like, it's just always interesting to reflect on what do we think of us as ourselves. Like, I think the answer that comes to mind to me is like, well, the boundaries of my skin, and then my hair, that's mine. But why is the hair? I can't feel my hair. I can't, if I pinch it, it doesn't hurt. So why do I think that's mine? But anyway, so that's that. Is that me? Is that the edge of me? But then if someone comes like really close, who is not invited, so there's me, there's the edge of my skin, and then there's my personal space, which is about, it's probably about, depending on who you are, it's about this big, flexible. But do you know what I mean? Like, we can feel intruded upon just by someone standing too close. So there's another me. And then there's my bedroom. That is definitely part of me. That's a boundary that I've agreed upon with other people that I live with. So interesting to think of like where our different ideas of me and mine are. And of course meditation can start to undermine that as well, just watching the breath. So I've digressed, but I will get back to generosity. Watching the breath, if you're feeling the breath just coming in here, like when is the breath actually part of myself? The air comes in, it's absorbed within the body, it's part of this sort of transfusion constantly happening. How can I say that there is an actual boundary between what's outside and what's inside? And sometimes we can just start to feel that like sort of connectedness in meditation. Or the metta bhavana as well, sense of or just a sense of our centrality in our worlds can start to dissolve just by bringing someone else to mind is a really good start. But sometimes that the loving kindness, when we develop it, takes on a life of its own, and it's no longer me generating loving kindness to these different people, but we're all in it, and that's those boundaries between what I think of me and mine, just very beautifully softened. Yeah, so you can think about other times. I think it's nice to reflect on times where we just feel more connected and less sort of held within me. This seems to be my action for me. Less defended. Yes, and generosity is a really good way of just keeping that tightness, opening it. Like every time you think of someone else, do something for someone else, you're working against this tendency to hold on to this idea. And what's at the heart of this is not that we're letting go of selfhood. So that's what we often think, like I'm letting go of selfhood. But what the realization is, and this is what Marpa will have realized, is that there's actually no selfhood to let go of. It's like he's doing all this work to let go of a fixed and separate self, but the whole time it was a delusion. The whole time it wasn't even there in the first place. How fascinating, how wonderful to be free of it. To no longer be hypnotized by a mirage, which is what this is really like how Vasantra is describing our sense of selfhood. To no longer be hypnotized by a mirage. So maybe I'll just see if there are any responses to some of the things I said just now. Any questions or we have? Anthea.
So you mentioned the self and me and this creation of what we say is me. brings me back to the story that you spoke about in the beginning, with the backpack, the heavy backpack and the gold.
Yeah.
So like that could be a me as well, you know, could be that burden. So sometimes I think, I know for myself, the things that I say me and that's mine, some of it is quite a burden. And sometimes I have to look at things, I'm like, is that really me? Or is that like I'm protecting myself? So it's very interesting how you tie those two in. It's, you know, bringing me to a point where I need to go a bit deeper.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to summarise that. So, just for online. So, you're saying that this sense of me is a burden, and like we create ways to protect ourselves, and that actually you're saying it's presenting a challenge to go a bit deeper and let go of some of those things. Yeah. I agree. I feel that it is a challenge, but it's actually also quite inspiring challenge as well. And actually, it's helped me develop a thought a bit further. Actually, it's I think we can think of the Marpa who's journeying to be a very, very positive me. He's, you know, it's a very positive identity that he's got. He's doing the right things with his life. So he started off on a journey of self-sacrifice. It's very generous of him to go and get a teaching for his disciple, and he's not intending to take or keep anything for himself. The gold he's carrying it to give to his teacher. So he's imbued with generosity. He's been meditating a lot. He's very highly trained in meditation. And this is a huge journey of faith, isn't it? Like it's a pilgrimage, it's a journey of faith. So determination and faith are really, really part of that. And yet still that selfhood is a burden. So it's like, well, that idea of a selfhood is a burden. So I think it's just really interesting, like we've probably got lots of habits that we don't want anymore, and like things that don't serve us, and you know, like our particular conditioning of our particular lives, things that we picked up and learnt, and you know, who knows where some of our odd behaviours come from that just sort of, so some of them, they're sort of they're not helpful. That's really good that we can reflect and be self-aware, and in relation to our friends, you know, try and iron out some of those things so that we're happier and more able to communicate more deeply with people, and able to know what we want, not sort of muddled by what other people think of us, all of those things. So that's a really good, important part of anybody's journey, and particularly that's part of Buddhist life. And like even a sort of perfected self, where all of our actions are generous, all of our meditations are deep, etc. Even that is a burden. Even that is a limit, is an actual limit, even if we are sort of gold on the inside. The whole time that we're contained within the bag, mesmerised by being situated here within this whatever shape we delineate ourselves, where that's the centre of the world. The whole time that's there, it's a complete limit. It's a complete limit, and however positive it is, that bag needs to be tipped upside down, and then we're actually free.